Today on No BS AI Briefing, the global AI regulatory fragmentation crisis is forcing builders to choose markets and redesign products. We'll also cover Google DeepMind's new robotics model that lets robots reason about the real world, and Google's latest hardware push to cut down on inference costs. We'll talk about what actually matters if you're building products right now. No BS AI Briefing brought to you by Proactive AI. Welcome back. I'm your host, Vikash. All right, let's jump straight into the headlines. First up, Google DeepMind shipped a new model called Gemini Robotics-ER 1.6, and this one is all about embodied AI. In plain English, this isn't just about chatbots. This is about giving physical robots the brains to understand and operate in the real, messy world. The model is designed to be reasoning first. That means instead of just executing a pre programmed command, a robot can look at a situation, understand it, and plan a complex series of actions on its own. It can even read analog instruments like old school pressure gauges and detect whether a task it performed was successful, all with minimal human help. For builders, this is a huge deal. It starts to solve the last mile problem of robotics. Instead of needing to custom train a model for every single device, every factory floor, every specific task, this approach enables what they call compositional reasoning and skill transfer. A robot that learns to turn one kind of valve can apply that learning to another. It dramatically lowers the friction for deploying robots in unstructured environments, which opens up a ton of new opportunities for AI native robotics platforms. I mean, they're already partnering with Boston Dynamics for industrial inspections. Think about that for a second. Next, the story that I think will define the next year for many of us. The rules governing AI in the US, the EU, and China are diverging fast, and the compliance burden is getting heavy. Three things happened almost at once. In the US, the federal administration is actively moving to block individual states from creating their own patchwork of AI rules. They want a single national standard to avoid a 50-front war for compliance. Meanwhile, in Europe, the industrial giant Siemens basically just said the quiet part out loud. They signaled they're going to prioritize spending their AI budget in the US and China over Europe, explicitly because of the EU's restrictive new rules. And then there's China, which just put out draft rules specifically targeting digital humans. They want to restrict creating non-consensual digital clones and mandate that all synthetic media be clearly labeled. For builders, the message is unavoidable. Your go-to-market strategy now has a huge legal and compliance dependency. You might need region-specific product variants. Entering the EU market could be significantly slower and more expensive. And if your product involves any kind of synthetic media, you absolutely need to build consent and labeling systems into the core of your product. Compliance is no longer a checkbox, it's a core product constraint. And our final headline, Google is getting ready to announce new inference-optimized TPUs. Look, for the last few years, the big story in AI hardware has been about training these massive models. It takes warehouses full of GPUs and costs millions. But now the bottleneck is shifting. The real recurring cost is inference. The cost of actually running the model to answer a user's query or power an agent. So, at the upcoming Google Cloud Next conference, they're set to unveil new tensor processing units or TPUs built specifically to make inference cheaper and faster. The goal is to slash the latency for chatbots and agents, making them feel more responsive and real time. For builders, this is more than just a new chip. It's about options. First, it's a direct challenge to the GPU-centric world we live in, dominated by a certain company. More competition is always good for prices. Second, Google is making sure these new TPUs support PyTorch, which is huge for the developer community, and they'll support on-premise deployments. That means you're not locked into a single cloud. You could run these in your own data center, which is a massive deal for companies with sensitive data or those wanting to avoid vendor lock-in. This is a clear signal that the infrastructure battle is moving from training to inference, and that's where we'll see the next wave of cost cutting and innovation. All right, of all those stories, There's one that I think deserves a deeper look. It's not a new model or a new chip, it's the global AI regulatory fragmentation crisis. So, what's really happening here? Let's zoom in. For months, we've seen these trends moving in parallel. The EU has been tightening the screws with the AI Act, the Data Act, and the DSA. It's a very prescriptive, risk based approach. The US has been a mix of federal inaction and a wild west of state level rules popping up in places like Utah. And China's been doing its own thing, aggressively promoting AI innovation while simultaneously putting strict guardrails around specific applications like synthetic media that could cause social instability. But in the last few days, these parallel tracks just collided. We saw an active push from the US administration to preempt the states, a clear signal they know the current chaos is untenable. We saw a massive global company like Siemens publicly declare that the EU's regulatory environment is now a factor in where they invest their money. And we saw China get incredibly specific with its draft rules on digital humans. This isn't theoretical anymore, it's happening right now and it's shaping the market. Why does this matter more than, say, a 5% improvement in a model's performance? Because this now drives your product scope, your market selection, and your costs in a way that incremental tech gains just don't. This is about what you are legally allowed to build and where you are allowed to sell it. So, who should really be paying attention? Honestly, everyone. But let's get specific. If you're a founder, you can no longer just build a product for a generic global audience. You need to model the higher compliance costs for the EU. You need to ask, is Europe our launch market, or is it a fast follow market after we found a product market fit somewhere with less regulatory friction like the US one? This is a fundamental strategic choice you have to make on day one. If you're a product manager, your job just got harder. You're now designing for compliance. For any feature involving synthetic media, you need to be thinking about consent flows, watermarking, and clear labeling from the very first wireframe. Region gating features isn't just a technical task anymore. It's a core product decision you'll have to own. And if you're an engineering leader, this is now an architectural concern. Your systems need to be built with compliance in mind. Can you produce an audit trail for a specific automated decision? Can you prove consent? Can you manage data residency requirements for different jurisdictions? These are first class features now, not something you can bolt on later. Here's how I'd think about it as a builder. I'd start treating regional compliance like we treat security or privacy. It's a non negotiable part of the platform. You wouldn't launch a product with a massive security hole, and soon you won't be able to launch an AI product without a clear compliance strategy. The risk of getting it wrong is just too high. Fines, being forced to pull your product from a market, reputational damage. It forces you to think in terms of a compliance ready architecture from the start. So, my no BS take on all this is simple. The era of move fast and break things for AI products is officially over. The regulatory moat is becoming very real, and frankly, it favors big companies with armies of lawyers. For startups and indie builders, this doesn't mean you can't compete, it just means you have to be smarter. You have to pick your markets strategically and build compliance into your product's DNA from the very beginning. Ignoring this now just means paying a much higher price to retrofit it later. If you're finding this useful, hit follow in your podcast app right now. It takes 2 seconds and it's the best way to make sure you don't miss the next briefing. Now, if you want one practical takeaway from today's episode, here it is. Run a thought experiment with your team. Ask this simple question. If the EU became a non-viable market for our product tomorrow, what would we change? Here's how you can do this in about 30 minutes. It's not about actually pulling out of Europe. It's a strategic exercise to find your product's center of gravity. First, get your product and engineering leads together. You don't need a big formal meeting. A quick huddle is fine. Second, on a whiteboard or a shared doc, list the features in your product that are most likely to fall under the EU AI Act's high-risk categories or other specific regulations. Think about anything that involves user profiling, automated decision making in sensitive areas, or, as we discussed, the creation of synthetic media. Third, go down that list and for each feature ask two brutal questions. One, is this feature driving significant user value and revenue outside the EU? And two, or is this feature primarily a compliance liability that we maintain for the EU market but which has low engagement elsewhere? The goal here is to identify features that have a very high compliance cost but provide low overall business value. This exercise forces you to see your product not as a single monolith but as a collection of features with different risk profiles and different value propositions in different markets. Why is this 30-minute exercise worth your time? Because it cuts through the noise. It forces you to justify complexity. You might discover a feature that you've been maintaining for years that is a huge compliance headache and barely gets used outside of one region. Maybe you should region gate it, maybe you should sunset it entirely and reinvest those resources into something that serves your core market better. It's about being intentional. Instead of letting regulatory pressures dictate your roadmap, you take control and make conscious decisions about where to focus your energy and what to let go of. It's a powerful way to simplify your product and your strategy. That's it for today's No BS AI briefing. If this helped, follow the show in your podcast app and share it with one builder you know. And if you've got questions or topics you want covered, connect with me on LinkedIn and send them over. See you in the next briefing.